Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's Specifying Practice Group call. So with that, I do want to hand it over to our co-hosts, our duo here, David and Lewis, as we get started with today's session. So David and Lewis, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm here in downtown Nashville on a off and on stormy day. And I introduce to you my partner, co-host, and the inspiration for this program, who is widely known for his assiduity, Mr. David Stutzman.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that was a word, Lewis, so you're going to have to explain that one later. And today I am causing Lewis all kinds of grief again because I'm out on the road, actually coming to you from Boston, attending GlassCon Global, a biennial conference where it's geared mostly to some amazing research behind glass and glazing as it affects the architectural and construction industry. It's a fabulous program.
Yeah, we had a couple of guys here that wanted to go very much to go to that. But I don't think either one of them were able to go. So
yes, well, it's a really a wonderful experience and a lot of really good information. Some amazing things coming down the road. So watch for some great developments in glass.
Okay. Well, today we thought we would talk about writing specs from scratch, and David came up with a kind of a food prep metaphor that we're going to follow. And so no canned mixes, or I should say box mixes. This is when somebody comes in and they've got something brand new that there is not a spec master for either, and if you're a subscriber to MasterSpec or BSD SpecLink, or if you've got a few sections that you've written in the past and you just don't have one for aluminum leaf finish on a ceiling or a bridge crane or some other interesting thing. Ann Whitaker and I exchanged a couple of emails sharing ideas because both of us had worked on some zoo projects and getting into some interesting issues with animal containment and display and getting the right size glass for an underwater viewing port for a walrus display. If you have a walrus that weighs 2,400 pounds and swims at 15 knots, how much pressure, if he hits the glass, would that amount to, and what kind of glass do you need? But call Globa Marata.
So maybe we should have brought you here to GlassCon Global and you could have presented that. So, spec from scratch. How do we go about it? How do we put something together that we've never written before? What sorts of things are we going to have to do? Well, you just gave away the store here, Lewis.
I know.
You did. Well, because we're on a cooking theme, like Lewis said, it was my idea. It just seemed to fit. And one of my favorite variety shows, Swedish Chef and from the Muppets, always amazed me because you never knew exactly what he was going to do, and he always ended up with some witty kind of a conclusion to his little skit. So whether we end up with a witty spec or not, hopefully it's one that we can actually work with when we're all done, and hope it works for the contractor and the owner. Okay, so Lewis, where do we go from here?
I did it again. There we go. All right.
We're going to revoke your driver's license.
Well, if you'd stay home and run the show yourself instead of gallivanting around the country.
It would work. I understand. Okay.
Well, of course, one of the first places to start is master format in terms of figuring out what are we going to call this sucker. So when the ID, your interior designer comes in and they have this wonderful new product that you've never heard of, and you're not even sure what division it goes in. Look at master format.
I'm glad that you picked on ID, because it never fails to amaze me. Virtually any project that we're working on, interior designers are always coming up with something brand new, something in the magazines they've seen or something that's been presented to them that we've never seen before. So it's not uncommon.
Absolutely. Some years ago, Arcom had a little contest for MasterSpec subscribers, and they challenged people to say, if you had a stuffed American bison, where would you specify that? And so that's not listed in the index for master format. My suggestion was I put it in with carpet as something to anchor the carpet in place, the rugs.
Our interior furnishings. There you go. So just to remind everybody, though, master format, and especially for those that are CSI members, master format is available online at masterformat.com, and it's searchable, the section numbers and titles, which actually gets you to an answer more quickly.
Or at least to a close neighborhood, because every once in a while you'll still stump it. There are still subjects that the master format team has not thought of yet.
That's true, but then you can always make your suggestion for an addition.
Yes.
Or correct. Yeah.
And then
so that's a favorite place to start anyhow. Look for it online. Those of you that are not CSI members, there's a way to fix that. That's annoying. So we would welcome you.
And then section format, which is a great tool, is kind of the skeleton that you can, or a ready-made outline that you can decide how to sequence the information, the data, and take data by sequencing it and giving it structure. We create information. And then it also serves as a checklist for completeness and say, oh yeah, I need to say something about that.
Right. So, and it doesn't take much. I keep a blank form, a section format, just the article titles. When starting something new, it gives me at least a start point for all the article titles. I can start to add notes to the structure about what I think I need to insert for each article. Even if I don't have the final text, at least I have a guide to get through the section.
Yeah, I think my template goes, I think, a couple of steps further. I have some standard language that gets popped up, that you use in a lot of different sections and goes down to like the paragraph level and under submittals. So to remind me that I need both product data and I may need shop drawings and I may or may not need samples, that kind of stuff. So that's really a tremendous tool. If you haven't done that already, folks, we really urge that you create that blank template for this purpose.
Right, and for anyone subscribed in MasterSpec and SpecLink, that kind of a template is available. MasterSpec, it's not quite so evident. You need to use the macro tools, the wizard, to be able to create a blank template and give you some of the standardized text that MasterSpec uses. It in SpecLink, I believe, it's been a while since I've used that product, has a separate template section that you can simply copy and insert.
And especially if you're going to think about that this may eventually become a spec master and may want to have some optional text in there, you'll want to format those text options so that you can use the short cut tools that are available either from SpecLink or from MasterSpec. So where would we go for kind of get some ideas and a good starting point, David?
Well, for me, one of the first things I think about is what existing spec section do I have that might resemble what I'm trying to write. And when I say resemble, I'm not suggesting that it's even in the same family of the kind of products or the kind of systems. But what I try to think of is what sorts of things do I need as far as, say, performance requirements. So if I'm trying to write an exterior envelope spec section that may have nothing to do with curtain wall, I may still go and pick items out of the curtain wall section because it has that exterior structural and performance requirements already built in. So I start to gather up some of those related kinds of spec sections as a basis.
Another example would be if you have, of course, if you have a section for aluminum composite material or some other lightweight cladding material, and all of a sudden your designer wants to use a terracotta cladding when you don't have a spec for that, they are at least similar enough that the one section might give you a leg up towards the other.
Right. I mean, any kind of resource like that, if you can just identify something that helps to get you close. We have listed here the spec template that we were discussing just a bit ago, but some of the other things I find helpful, especially if it's an unusual section. It's always worth checking the UFGS and some of the other federal agencies to see if they have something that's written.
And we might.
It amazes me what they have.
It does. They have a distinctive style, but there's a lot of information there, and it's free. You used to have to pay for it. It used to be called, what was that, CCCD?
Yeah, through NIB, the construction criteria base.
Yes, exactly.
And all of the UFGS and the Veterans Affairs and others are available on the NIBS website, nibs.org. You can find all of them there and download them at no cost whatsoever. So it's a great resource. It's a place certainly to go and at least check the table of contents to see if there's something that might be applicable or even come close. You may be pleasantly surprised.
And of course, the manufacturer website. A couple of years back, we had Phil Kabza as a guest presenter, the spec guy who writes a lot of manufacturer example specs, and that's a good session if you're interested in using them. There are some things that you need to look out for, but they can be very useful as a starting point. But they're rarely can you just put the header and footer on them and push them out the door. They're usually not quite suitable for that.
Right. So, Louis, we have our first question from Kathy McTamney asking, what are your thoughts on the difference between ARCOM and BSD?
Well, be politically correct, David, since CSI owns BSD.
I understand that. Okay, so Kathy, I think it's, for the purposes of what we're trying to do today, I think that's a discussion that might be beyond where we want to go. Both of them serve a purpose. I would say that ARCOM probably has a larger market share than BSD at the moment. They have they have an extensive library, as does BSD, but they have a different approach to the specs, and you really need to look at how they're approaching it and decide for yourself as to whether or not it's going to be something worthwhile for you. ARCOM does tend to be more verbose than BSD for sure, and to some that's an advantage, and to others it's not.
We might, in the point of full disclosure, mention that David used to be the principal author for still another rival specification system called SpecText that used to be published by the Construction Research Foundation.
Sciences Research
Construction Sciences Research, yes.
Which is now owned, and SpecText is now owned by Arcom.
And has been rebranded and repurposed for infrastructure projects.
Correct.
But there are some other sources for free specs, especially manufacturer specs, but also some in forspecs.com, and Specs Plus is another free source. They have both manufacturer written specs and some specs that I think are written by our old friend Craig Haney.
Right, and the one thing on Specs Plus is it's architectural related subjects only. It's not engineering. So if you're looking for engineering specs, that'll be the wrong place to go to find it.
But beyond the freebies, now if we're getting into the research part, where do we get the information? Well, obviously we have to comply with the codes, and sometimes the codes have very specific requirements, such as the wind testing for copings and NFPA 285 testing for certain exterior wall assemblies.
Well, let's face it, we can't write the spec if we don't know what the code requirement is.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, you can, but it could be very embarrassing.
Could be extremely embarrassing and awfully expensive.
Yes.
So, yeah, we've got to check the codes. We've got to know what the code says as far as reference standards that actually apply to the material or to the system. And we've got to make sure that we're at least complying with the minimum code requirements. So that's a given. I mean, that's statutory requirement.
And, of course, if there's an article in the construction specifier for us CSI members, or in one of the other various trade journals about featuring a new product, if you remember which issue that was in, that can be very helpful as a place to give you some ideas about how to write a spec for a given product, like solitubes. Right.
But I want to jump to the bottom of the list first.
Okay. Oh.
YouTube. I have been absolutely amazed what you can find on YouTube.
Yes.
It's been incredible. You want to know about a particular product. Manufacturers and sometimes contractors, sometimes installers are actually creating YouTube videos. How do you do this?
Yes, they'll have installation, little short installation videos.
Yeah, it's been fabulous. The amazing things you can find on YouTube, and it's a quick search. So, hey, let Google walk you all around the universe with your searches on whatever you're trying to find. But and there are other ways to get to some of these reference standards. For instance, there are subscription services that give you access to virtually any reference standard that you want, as long as you're willing to pay for it, of course. But those are a great way to try to stay current with reference standards anymore, and to try, especially the ones relating to building and construction.
We have a couple of questions and comments.
I see them coming in. So you want me to take care of them?
I'll read them and you answer them.
Oh, wait a minute. This sounds unfair, but go ahead.
Edgardo says, for your information, Specs Intact is another source for the UFGSs, and it's a freebie. Specs Intact, of course, is actually a software to generate specifications, and it is expert tolerant rather than user friendly.
Follow the rules. That's my only comment. Just follow the rules and you'll be fine.
Christian Nielsen says, ask if there's any source for specifications in Spanish. Now there's a timely question.
Yes, and I would say I had no idea.
Yeah, I can't help it. I'm sorry, I'm not a Spanish speaker myself. I have a smattering of Esperanto and Koine, but and German, but we can't answer that one. Sorry. Kelly Gray says YouTube can be dangerous. Not everyone installs products correctly, even if they don't know that it's not done correctly.
You're absolutely right, Kelly, and I did watch one like that and couldn't believe that they were actually suggesting how to flash a roof when I saw what was going on. I would love to have been an inspector on that job to stop them.
Stephen Buck asks if one internet search engine is better than the rest in finding specification information. And that's an excellent question, David. How would you respond to that?
Depends upon what you're looking for. If you're looking for suggestions for manufacturer specs, my first stop would probably be ForSpecs. Not truly a search engine, but a directory, because all of the manufacturers that actually offer specifications are there. There's a little icon that appears on their listings on ForSpecs, so that's a great way to know what it is that they've got.
And arcat.com.
Arcat, because
and Suites. But a lot, you can get an amazing amount of data just by typing in a question into Google or Bing, either one. Now,
right, and actually, I
are
start
different.
With,
you may get different answers to those two.
Yeah, Google tends to give you advertisers first, and I've got to be careful that you're selecting somebody that's actually a manufacturer if you're looking for manufacturer's product information instead of a distributor, because the distributors and the advertisers tend to appear at the top of the list.
Yeah.
So just be careful what you're selecting as a source.
Okay. Jan Seaman says that manufacturers usually provide other languages. I have not run into that, but I'm sure, especially in Canada, or manufacturers who are based in Canada would certainly have sample specs in French. So Nathan Carroll says DuckDuck works best for me. I'm not sure I've ever tried that.
I know I have not, but I've heard of the browser or the search engine and have not tried it myself.
Poppy Bushnell asks, what's the actual website for Specs Attack? That's a new one on me.
Oh, no, I think he's referring to Specs Intact. Specs Intact.
So, Specs Intact. Yeah, right. That's that software. And again, if you go to nibs.org, you should, I think that has all that stuff in it.
Yeah, you'll be able to find it there.
Yeah. The Specs Intact is something that's usually required by the Corps of Engineers and other government agencies.
Okay.
And then there's networking.
Always a good choice, because we've seen it in action. CSI members are especially willing to share. I have found that to be true virtually across the board. If I'm really desperately needing something and I can find a CSI member and I ask and they have it, they typically gladly share it.
Absolutely. Now, sometimes the powers that be, our employers might blanch at such an attitude, but we're a close-knit guild, and I'm always willing to share something, or if not actual text, at least point people in the right direction. But I frequently share specs, just remove the indicia from my firm and pass things over, as long as it's not copyrighted material that belongs to somebody else.
And for the most part, it's going to be used for a specific project anyhow, even though we like to think it might be copyrighted. It's really...
Well, subscribers to MasterSpec and BSD SpecLink have to be a little bit careful about that. You're really not supposed to share their language. But if you've written a section yourself, there's no reason why you can't pass it on. And of course, people even do that with people that they don't know, haven't met face-to-face, via 4Specs forum and the CSI LinkedIn group. Just the other day, I got a fan mail message saying that from someone who had mentioned that they needed a rather obscure spec section. They posted a query on CSI LinkedIn and got one later the same day.
So, and here I'll pose my question to the group here. I am still looking for a good specification for planting palms. I have a landscape architect that I'm working with that claims that the spec just doesn't meet his expectations. Although he can't tell me what it might be missing or what he thinks might be incorrect. So I'm still searching for that perfect palm transplanting spec. If anybody wants to share, I'll be happy to talk.
That's a new one on me, but I'll have to ask one of my... I do have a CSI member in my Tampa office. I'll have to ask him if he's got something up his sleeve. Stephen Buck has a question. He says, if a colleague lets you use his spec in whole or in part, are you required to give him credit in this section? No, we like I say, we all do that for one another, and like our Red Green here, the favorite hero of many Canadians and Americans, is, well, likes to say, we're all in this together.
Yes, we are. And there are way too many times that we need help, and gosh, everybody needs help now and again, so offering help is a small price to pay for the help that you may get from others.
Absolutely. And Kevin Cheney points out, as your local chapter, you may know somebody, not only a specifier as such, but knowing the right person to call with questions about roofing and sealants and glass and aluminum work and paint is critical to your success.
Okay, so we've got to take Kevin O'Byrne's comment about giving a source for spec credit. So Kevin says, give them the credit in the spec only if you want to share the professional liability with them or pass the liability on to them.
That's right. So we do advise removing the indicia. That means your firm identification when you share a spec.
Yes. Good idea.
Well, so we got this data. What do we do with it? We
slice and dice. You have to stay on the kitchen theme. So, yeah, once you have all the data, what's the specifier doing? We're really organizing, analyzing. We're trying to figure out how to take all kinds of disparate data and turn it into something that's going to be meaningful for a contractor and for an owner. So we end up slicing it apart, deciding really what's important, what's not. Let's get rid of everything that might be extraneous. Let's try to rearrange things to make them more meaningful. And, gosh, if we have something that we can reuse, yes, let's go grab it and see if we can turn it into something that would be helpful.
I think, to me, the key bullet is number 2, is deciding what's important. When you get manufacturers' product information, and they may have some stuff in there about how it's manufactured, some of the chemical compositions and things like that, you have to say to yourself, what's really important in terms of giving the contractor the information it needs to buy the right stuff and install it correctly.
You mean screw threads are not important?
Oh, they're important, but so what's important in terms of the final? How does it work in the project? What are the necessary attributes, the critical stuff?
Right, because we're not normally specifying the absolute nitty-gritty detail of how something's going to be manufactured, or means and methods about how things are going to be installed. So there are many sources of information that include all sorts of things like that you really need to weed out as you're going through and constructing a specification.
Yes, because manufacturers have been known to put things in their example specs that will cut out a lot of competition. And they're not things that are critical and essential to the performance of the product on the job. Keith Robinson has a comment on our previous slide. He says that the Portland, Seattle group has a specifier share group. Really easy to ask if anyone has a spec to match a new category. You may be surprised at how many people have already created the spec from scratch and are willing to share. And yes, that's exactly what we mean, Kevin. So, Keith, that we do need to know who you can call.
So I want to back up to one of the comments from Kevin Sheldon. Says,
Yes.
When writing a finished hardware spec, use an AHC. So here's another approach. If you're looking to write something brand new, maybe you do want to tap somebody else who's an expert in the field, some subject matter expert.
Oh yes, a couple of years ago I had to write a spec for a bridge crane, which I'd never done before and didn't have anything lying around that I could use, and I couldn't even find a manufacturer example spec. So I looked at some information, but I also called a local installer and talked to that person a little bit, and they were very helpful about giving me some pointers about how they work and what are the features that you need.
Yeah. So and it can be very helpful. I'll relay another story here a little bit. It's the kinds of things you can run into. So let's go on to the next spot. What do we do when we're done slicing?
We got to grind this sucker out.
Yes, we do. So I took some liberty with CSI's stance, and I will take full responsibility, and if anybody wants to throw tomatoes, that's fine, but I stand by the attitude. CSI would tell us begin writing the spec by writing part 2. And the only caveat that I would have to that is let's write the summary first. Let's decide what it is that we are really going to write about in the section, because if we can say it clearly in the summary, in a sentence or a paragraph, we have a roadmap for writing the spec.
Yeah, especially
we know what should be there.
Especially think about those ID feature products, and so if you say decorative wall-facing system in lobby or in room such and such, or in the pre-function room or something like that, that gives a little hint to the contractor where it is and what is it in general. Because looking at part 2, they may not say, well, what the heck is that? But if we've told them it's a decorative wall facing, or it's a decorative glazing system for interior partitions or something, that it can be very helpful to understanding the spec, and the more it's understood, the more likely it is to be complied with.
Yeah, so that really brief summary statement, and that's all it should be, is brief. Sets the stage and gives you a clear path for completing the rest of the spec. Then, sure, move on to part 2. Let's write this thing. Let's start with all the products and systems, but let's do it in some sort of a rational order. My own preference is if I'm writing a product or a manufactured kind of a product, I'll start with the largest piece or the most important part of the product and work my way down to the accessory products. If I'm looking at an assembly, I might start with the exterior and work towards the interior, or work from the bottom up. Something that seems to make sense, and keep the order consistent throughout part 2 instead of jumping around, because it helps the reader eventually to understand how the parts and pieces are going together.
So you don't start with the screws that hold on the subframing that then support the lightweight cladding.
No, let's hope not. Let's talk about the cladding first. Okay, and then in part 3, I approach it in the same sort of a rational order. What is the order that the contractor actually installs the product?
Yes.
So let's walk through the steps in order so that it serves a couple of purposes. It gives, again, a roadmap for creating the section. It gives the CA staff from the design firm some understanding of what they might be able to expect when they're out in the field at a particular point in time as they're reviewing the project progress. And it gives the contractor some level of confidence that you understand what this product really is. So we write the summary, we write part 2, we write part 3, both in some form of rational order, pick your own order. Go back to part 1.
And now we know what submittals to ask for. Hopefully we haven't written the submittal requirements anywhere else. And what kind of quality assurance standards or whatever to say.
Right. So, and remember, part 1, it's everything that costs time and money and contributes nothing to the end result. So be judicious about what you include in part 1. We can ask for everything, but it's going to cost somebody, in this case the owner, money to be able to have everything.
Kevin O'Byrne has another trenchant observation. He says, it may be useful to the audience to provide some advice on plagiarism. If you got a spec or part of it from some source, such as something posted online, that is or may be copyrighted, how much of it can you cut and paste without permission? To what extent does the U.S. copyright fair use rule apply to specs? Most folks steal such content without much thought to whom it really belongs. Excellent observation, Kevin. Of course, manufacturers who provide example specs want you to use them. They want you to steal their stuff. On the other hand, ARCOM and BSD make their money by selling their text, their deathless prose, to people that they can sucker into an expensive subscription. So it's a matter of judgment in that, but and obviously some language is just going to be pretty well universal, and it's hard to prove where it came from in the first place. But and Kevin goes on to point out, these days, since there are a lot of bidding docs posted online, it's too easy to steal from another consultant, and you do need to be careful about, just being honorable and ethical about not using stuff that MasterSpec is so distinctive in their language, you can probably figure out whether or not you're stealing from them. It's not to say that you can't take that information and rewrite it in your own words, which is, of course, what people who write books do all the time. Research students, you read a book and you read a paragraph and you say, that makes sense, and then you put that into your own language and put it into your what you're creating at home.
And presumably give credit.
It depends upon the level of citing. You know, if it's if you can't copyright ideas.
Right.
You can only copyright direct expression. And
copyright in this case, especially when it comes to some of the spec services like MasterSpec and BSD, MasterSpec sells product MasterSpec to the manufacturers as a concept, and with that comes the ability for the manufacturers to distribute the specification that they've essentially paid for. I believe those still come with a MasterSpec copyright, although the purpose of the program is to allow the manufacturers to distribute the spec for its use.
And if you see a copyright assertion on that or on another manufacturer's private example spec, the reason that's there is they want to protect the document as a whole, so that, for example, a rival manufacturer of rubber roofing or whatever can't take that whole spec and distribute it to promote their products. But there's usually some text in there that say that they grant private users, a license to use it for construction specifications.
Okay, so we've had a comment from Christian Nielsen that says copyright would be a great future program. So we're going to have to take that into consideration.
Yes, maybe we'll get Kevin and Christian to be guest presenters. Be careful what you ask for, folks. You might get it.
We've done it before. Okay, so we're coming close to wrapping up a spec. So what we're trying to do or suggest is that once you get through all of the cutting and grinding, that really we need to get it mixed together to get it with some level of consistency and coordination with all of the documents. We're suggesting with drawings, but coordination even among the specifications to make sure that what we're getting at the end result is indeed what is intended.
And internal consistency or coordination within the spec section. I've seen many a spec from outside consultants that calls a given product something in part 2 and then uses a slightly different terminology in part 3.
Well, and that's so easy to have happen, especially if you're assembling a spec from multiple sources.
Yes.
As you would be when you're writing a spec from scratch.
And especially if there are multiple products in it, it's a little easier to write a section that's only got one thing in it.
So here's a way that you can try to help to control that. So you look at part 2, look at the more streamlined approach to writing the specification by using a heading for the paragraph or for an article title, and that becomes the terminology that you're using throughout. Because those kinds of things are easy to find, and then you can use those as a guide to try to help make sure that we get more consistency.
And you may want to talk with that ID person, bless her heart, who came up with this unusual product that she wants to use, and agree up front what we're going to call it on the drawings.
Yes, because you know what example I've got? We had, ID, bless her heart, selected a plastic glazing. So they've labeled it on the drawings as PG, whatever, PG3. So I go and I try to look up this product to find out what it really is so that I can actually specify it, because the description on the finish schedule didn't even come close to helping. And finally found the manufacturer, asked them about the product, and they said, oh yes, we know exactly what you're talking about. That is a sculpted MDF panel.
It wasn't plastic at all.
It wasn't plastic. It wasn't glazing. It wasn't anything remotely what the interior designer had labeled it. But, you know, it's an issue where we have to at least be questioning what's going on in the drawings and whether or not it's even consistent with the spec that we're trying to write. So
yes,
trying to make that, and trying to help, in this case, change the terminology that's been used in the drawings to make it more believable and match more closely to the specification was one of the last tasks to try to get through this thing.
And of course, to make things user-friendly for the poor contractor that's got to actually purchase the stuff, and then the mechanic that's going to put it on the wall.
Yes.
Christian and Kevin are accusing us of discouraging comments by threatening them with being guest presenters.
No, we're not, but we know who you are.
Yes.
Okay, so we're coming near the end, are we not?
Yeah.
That looks like the lunch they served here today. Holy cow, there was so much of it. Okay. As we're coming up to finishing this spec from scratch, personally, the way that we try to approach it, I'm not concerned about any of the physical appearance of the specification until I get to the end. And
well,
I will, at that point...
We might explain to folks that David is an independent specifications consultant, and so he has to... he has dozens of formats that he has to match for his ongoing clients.
Yes, everybody wants to design the look of their spec. We have fonts, margins, headers, footers, graphics, no graphics. The list goes on. So
at my previous firm, I actually had two templates, David. I had one template that was in Courier type and slightly different spacing on the page to give, because I would print the drafts out and give them to the project architect, who would make decisions, mark comments on them, and so forth. And then when I made the final cut, then I would press a couple of buttons using a macro to change it to the final dressy template with the right styles. And that also prevented somebody from accidentally grabbing a draft spec off my desk and trying to publish it before it was ready.
Well, you only think that prevented. Okay, but I do all of these things at the very end.
Yes, Christian suggests if you use Arial narrow size 9 points with half-inch margin, saves about 25% of the paper.
Yes, and it probably drives the contractor crazy trying to use it, but okay, we can save a tree or two. But finishing up the spec, making it look right, making it, getting the paragraph spacing, getting rid of widows and orphans, and proofing and publishing all come right down to the end. And for me, for my purpose, all of that is done automatically. So once I get to this point, I don't even really have to think about it much, because we've already established a template or a set of styles for a particular client, and now it's just really a matter of applying those styles, which includes the header and footer, and really all that's left for us is to proofread it and turn it into a PDF and start to use it.
Christian makes the snarky remark, no one reads the specs anyway, and it's like the the old specifiers joke, what's the difference between a plan room and a courtroom?
And
in the courtroom, they read the specs.
Yes, they do. If something goes wrong, it's the first thing somebody picks up.
Matthew Matlock asks, how are reference standards established if ASTM has yet to establish a foundation for a new system or product? Yeah, that's a good question. And that's one of the things that you will find in your research. And of course, ASTM doesn't cover everything in the world. There are ANSI standards as well, and standards by other trade organizations that are equally useful and equally valid. It's a matter of finding them.
Right. And ASTM, too, just realized that these reference standards, regardless what they are in effect an industry consensus. It doesn't mean that it's the best. Doesn't mean even that it's necessarily right for a particular project, but it is a consensus standard. And at that point, it really becomes a least common denominator that everyone in the process is willing to accept. So,
and of course, with those standards, there are times when if you want a higher quality, you may use that as a starting point and say, well, that may be the minimum, but I may want to raise that minimum to a higher level if I know that there's a manufacturer out there that makes it to
right. It'd be just like applying the codes, because the codes are also minimum requirements. So you can always improve what the code requires. In the case of a standard, you can always require something more stringent, even though you're referencing a particular standard as a start point.
I have another funny story, if you don't mind me taking a minute, about the appearance of specifications. Most of my practice was actually in Cincinnati, up in Ohio, and I just moved to Tennessee. Well, it'll be 21 years this fall. And at that time, up through the early 90s, if you did work for the state, the specifications had to be printed on 8.5 by 14 paper. And of course, the only way to bind that is with those 2-hole ACO binders that are made out of old coffee cans. At the top, and they're unwieldy and terrible. Well, I discovered that by going to a slightly smaller font, I could print the same set of specs on 8.5 by 11 and have the same page breaks. It just made a slightly wider margin on the right, but it was perfectly readable. And so I would make 2 sets. One, the official set for the state of Ohio, and then I printed out a separate set that we could bind conventionally for our CA staff. Well, the first time one of our contract administrators showed up on the job site with that, the Ohio guy, the state of Ohio guy, he told me went ballistic. He just couldn't deal with that. But the contractor turned to him and said, I'll pay you to print me some of those.
Well, you know what? I think the copy machines have fixed all of that. So go ahead and print it 11 by 14 and just press the whatever it is, 80% reduction, and there we go.
That's true. This was back in the old days of a daisy wheel printer, and I was just able to go to a slightly different, slightly smaller font. But of course now people are going to be reading specs off of their tablet computers and off of their smartphones and things like that. So a lot of the business about what they physically look like is in the process of changing. So that's what's cooking, folks.
Yeah, so let's ask one last question, and you can just type it in as a comment from everybody. What has been your most unusual spec from scratch?
Oh, yeah.
Let's see what kind of range that we get.
Yeah,
I will give you two that I wrote. One was a 20-ton dump truck.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yes, and to go with it, a custom front end loader to be able to turn sludge as it composted. All right, well, Lewis, we're over our time, but we're having such a great time of this, guys.
Tell them about next month, your friend. We have a really exciting show next month, folks.
Oh, that's right. That is next month, isn't it?
It is August, yes.
So, but we've already committed to the first Thursday, so you may have to do this, because I'll be traveling again.
Oh, no. Okay.
So we have a guest speaker for next month, and gosh, Louis, you caught me off guard, and I'm going to forget his name now. Russell Kenzor from the National Floor Safety Institute is going to be talking about slip resistance and being able to actually measure slip resistance reliably and measuring it in the field, something that is newly being promoted through NFSI and a new ANSI standard. So I've heard Russell before. He helped present on the panel that I moderated for the Allentown chapter CSI, and it'll be a really good presentation. So I hope that you can all join us.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you got something out of this that's usable as well. And we're always looking for ideas, so keep the cards and letters coming in, friends and neighbors, and we'll try to, because we really, David and I both feel very strongly that this is your show, and we have our own ideas, but if you've got a priority, it's something that you need to know about to write a spec from scratch, give us a call and send us an email, and we'll see what we can do for you.